You're exhausted. Not because life is hard, not because people are cruel. You're exhausted because you are surrounded. And being surrounded is expensive in ways no one ever warned you about. Every person who has access to you takes a piece. A text you feel obligated to answer. A plan you agree to. Without thinking, a version of yourself you quietly maintain so nothing feels awkward. So nothing feels tense. So nothing feels misunderstood. Nothing is forced. That's the trap. That's why you never see it coming. Power doesn't leave you in a dramatic collapse. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets and tragedy. It leaks. Slowly, quietly, through cooperation, through availability, through being emotionally open in spaces that do not protect you. You are taught early to see this as normal, to see responsiveness as maturity, to see constant engagement as strength. You were taught to fear isolation, to associate it with weakness, instability, failure. But isolation is not the absence of support. Isolation is the removal of interference. Support always comes with a price, and that price is rarely stated up front. It costs your availability, your predictability, your emotional accessibility. Every bond writes an invisible contract you never consciously signed. Be unreachable, be reasonable, be explainable. Consider how others feel. Manage their reactions. Smooth the edges of your decisions so no one gets uncomfortable. Sign enough of these contracts and something subtle happens. Your life slows down, not because you lack ambition, not because you lack intelligence, but because every move you make now passes through filters you didn't install. You stop moving sharply. You hesitate. You calculate reactions before you act. You anticipate questions before you speak. You adjust. You adjust. You adjust. The people who socialize the most, who are plugged into everything and everyone, are often the easiest to manage. They can't disappear without raising concern. They can't act suddenly without explanation. They can't move without permission disguised as courtesy. Isolation breaks that mechanism. When you are alone, nothing needs justification. Nothing needs softening. Nothing needs approval. You act when you decide, not when it feels acceptable to others. Not when consensus forms. Not when everyone understands. You act from internal certainty, and internal certainty is what they fear most. Look at who society pressures, not criminals, not open rebels, but people who withdraw quietly, people who stop explaining themselves, people who reduce access. Withdrawal is unsettling because it breaks the system without confrontation. A person who steps back becomes harder to read, harder to predict, harder to control. That uncertainty makes others uncomfortable, even hostile. At first, isolation feels wrong, then boring, then restless. Your nervous system, trained on constant input, protests. It screams for validation. It begs for noise, and then something clears. Your decisions grow quieter. Your emotions stop being negotiated with strangers. Your standards stop requiring explanation. You stop asking for consensus to move forward. You begin acting from internal certainty rather than external validation. The shift isn't confidence. Confidence still seeks feedback. The shift is indifference. Not apathy, not bitterness. Self-containment. When you no longer care who agrees, who understands, who stays, you remove the leverage others unconsciously had over you. And that's when the realization lands, slowly, unmistakably. You were never lacking strength. You were never broken. You were just surrounded. At some point, without noticing, you became useful. Not powerful, not respected. Useful. People don't announce it when it happens. They just start coming to you more often. For your opinion, for your time, for your presence, for your availability. At first it feels like relevance. Then it becomes routine. Then it becomes expectation. An expectation is where power quietly flips direction. The moment people expect access to you, the relationship changes. You are no longer choosing interaction. You are maintaining it. Maintenance requires consistency. Consistency requires explanation. Explanation requires emotional exposure. Now your inner state matters to others. That is the danger. Socialization conditions you to remain legible. You are supposed to be understandable, predictable, emotionally readable. Because legible people are easy to manage. Once people can read you, they can time you. Once they can time you, they can interrupt you. Once they can interrupt you, they can slow you. Power does not collapse under attack. Power collapses under friction. Notice how often you delay decisions because of people. Not because the decision is wrong, but because someone will react. Someone will ask questions. Someone will feel ignored. Someone will take it personally. So you wait. You soften. You explain. That delay is not courtesy. It is compliance. The greatest threat to authority is emotional entanglement. Entanglement forces justification. Justification invites negotiation. Negotiation dissolves dominance. This is why rulers historically reduced proximity. Not because they hated people, but because closeness produces claims. And claims create limits. When you stop socializing, something practical changes immediately. Your time stops fragmenting. No spontaneous interruptions. No emotional detours. No invisible obligations. At first, the emptiness feels strange. Then it becomes productive, because uninterrupted time reveals patterns you never noticed while surrounded. Patterns in people. Patterns in yourself. Patterns in how often you compromise without realizing it. Isolation does not make you wiser instantly. It makes you harder. You stop cushioning truth. You stop pre-adjusting behavior. You stop accounting for feelings that are not your responsibility. This hardening is not cruelty. It is boundary restoration. People react strongly to this shift, not because you did something to them, but because you stopped doing something for them. You stopped being accessible. You stopped being responsive. You stopped being predictable. They feel the loss before you do, and they will try to name it. They will call it arrogance. They will call it distance. They will call it ego. Those labels are not diagnoses. They are protest. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't miss you when you withdraw. They miss the version of themselves that existed when they had access to you. Your attention, your affirmation, your emotional labor. When that disappears, they feel smaller. So they attack the change instead of examining the loss. Being alone long enough forces a shift in internal authority. You stop checking with others before deciding. You stop narrating your moves. You stop preparing explanations in advance. Your decisions become quieter and final. This is when isolation stops feeling passive and starts feeling decisive. Power is not built by adding people. Power is built by subtracting access. Not everyone deserves proximity. Not everyone deserves insight. Not everyone deserves reaction. Isolation is how you enforce that truth. The moment you pull back, the environment shifts. Not dramatically, not immediately. Subtly, people begin to test your absence. They send messages that don't need answers. They create reasons to re-enter your space. They manufacture urgency where none exists. This is not coincidence. It is a system checking whether access has truly been revoked. Social systems do not tolerate missing pieces. Every group unconsciously assigns roles. The listener, the stabilizer, the entertainer, the problem solver. When you withdraw, your role remains, but you don't. This creates imbalance, and imbalance triggers corrective behavior. The first response is curiosity. Where have you been? You've been quiet. Everything okay? These questions are not concerned. They are reconnaissance. The system is assessing whether your withdrawal is temporary or structural. If you return quickly, nothing changes. If you remain absent, escalation begins. The second response is moral framing. You've changed. You're distant. You're not the same anymore. Notice what is missing. They don't say you did something wrong. They say you became something wrong. Your character is questioned, not your actions. This is intentional. Moral framing pressures you to it is a soft weapon. If that fails, the third response appears. Exclusion. You are left out of information, out of plans, out of conversations. This is meant to punish you, but it only works if you fear loss of inclusion. If you don't, the dynamic reverses. Here is where isolation turns into leverage. When you stop chasing reconnection, something unsettling happens. People start adjusting around you. They lower demands. They choose words carefully. They hesitate before interrupting, because uncertainty has entered the equation. Predictable people are easy to handle. Unpredictable people require caution. Isolation creates unpredictability, not through chaos, through silence. No updates. No emotional signals. No visible intention. Others are forced to guess. Guessing drains energy. Attestation presence changes without effort. When you do re-enter a space, it is noticed, not because you are louder, but because you are rare. Scarcity alters perception. What is always available is consumed without thought. What is limited is handled carefully. This is not psychology. This is economics. Isolation also changes your internal posture. You stop pre-explaining your decisions. You stop negotiating before acting. You stop seeking alignment before movement. Your actions become self-contained. This makes others uncomfortable, because comfort comes from predictability. Power does not require constant assertion. It requires asymmetric engagement. You do not respond at the same speed. You do not reveal at the same depth. You do not invest equally. Imbalance creates hierarchy. At these point, attempts to pull you back intensify. People test boundaries more directly. They provoke reactions. They attempt to guilt you. These attempts reveal something critical. They're reacting to loss of influence, not loss of connection. Connection can be replaced. Influence cannot. If you hold position, a final shift occurs. The narrative about you changes. You are no longer described emotionally. You are described strategically. He is hard to reach. He keeps to himself. He moves quietly. These are not insults. They are acknowledgments. Isolation has altered your status without confrontation. You did not argue. You did not explain. You did not demand. You simply removed access, and access is the real currency. At first, isolation feels like a reaction. You withdraw because something feels wrong, because people exhaust you, because conversations start to feel repetitive, invasive, empty. But reaction is unstable. If isolation remains emotional, it collapses under pressure. To become power, it must turn mechanical. Power is never accidental. It is designed. Most people misunderstand the distance. They think isolation means disappearing completely, cutting everyone off, becoming unreachable. That is not power, that is chaos. Real isolation is controlled exposure. You are not gone. You are regulated. The first layer of this system is response control. You stop responding according to urgency created by others. Messages are no longer answered based on emotional pressure. Calls are no longer taken simply because they arrive. You respond when it is strategically clean to respond. This does something subtle but profound. It reverses tempo. The person who controls tempo controls interaction. The person who reacts immediately surrenders tempo. Over time, people begin adjusting to your rhythm instead of expecting you to match theirs. That is, hierarchy forming quietly. The second layer is information discipline. You stop explaining your movements. You stop announcing intentions. You stop narrating your inner process. Not because you are hiding, but because information is leverage. The more people know about what you are doing, the more they feel entitled to comment, influence, or interfere. Silence removes entitlement. You let results speak instead of process. This creates asymmetry. Others talk. You observe. Others speculate. You decide. The third layer is emotional containment. Most people leak emotion constantly. They vent, They complain. They process out loud. This feels healthy, but it creates dependency. It invites comfort, advice, correction, judgment. When you stop leaking emotion, something shifts. People no longer know how to place you emotionally. They cannot tell if you are pleased or displeased. They cannot tell if you are affected or indifferent. This ambiguities and destabilization creates caution. Isolation also restructures your thinking. Without constant social input, your mind stops fragmenting. You are no longer reacting to opinions, news, group moods, emotional contagion. Your thoughts lengthen. You begin thinking in chains, not impulses. If I do this now, what happens in 6 months? If I allow this access, what happens next year? If I delay, who adjusts? This is strategic thinking. It cannot exist in constant social noise. Isolation is not about being alone. It is about reducing interference. As your isolation becomes consistent, people begin to treat you differently. They choose words carefully. They hesitate before assuming access. They wait instead of demanding. This is not respect in the emotional sense. It is recognition of boundaries. Boundaries create shape. Shape creates authority. There will be pressure to break the system. People will test you. They will appeal to history. We've always talked like this. They will appeal to emotion. You've become distant. They will appeal to morality. This isn't healthy. These appeals are not about your well-being. They are about restoring familiarity. Familiarity benefits them. Distance benefits you. If you explain yourself here, the system weakens. Explanation invites negotiation. Negotiation reopens access. Silence is not passive in this phase. Silence is enforcement. Over time, something irreversible happens internally. You stop checking yourself against others. You stop anticipating reactions. You stop adjusting identity for approval. Your sense of authority becomes internal. You no longer feel rushed. You no longer feel pressured. You no longer feel watched. This is the moment isolation stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like position. Power is not built by visibility. It is built by control of engagement. Who gets access? Who gets response? Who gets explanation? Isolation is not escape from people. It is command over proximity. Hierarchy rarely changes through confrontation. Direct challenges create resistance. Resistance unites opposition. Real shifts in hierarchy happen quietly, when one person changes position and everyone else is forced to recalibrate. Isolation is one of the few moves that does this automatically. When you reduce access, people lose reference points. They don't know how available you are, how much you care, how invested you remain. This uncertainty destabilizes existing assumptions, and assumptions are the foundation of hierarchy. Most social structures depend on predictable roles. Who initiates? Who responds? Who explains? Who waits? These patterns run on habit. When you withdraw consistently, the pattern breaks. You are no longer where you were expected to be. This creates a vacuum. Vacuum forces adjustment. Others begin compensating. Some talk more to fill silence. Some hesitate to act without feedback. Some attempt to regain alignment. All of this shifts energy toward you, not away. You are no longer circulating within the system. The system is circulating around your absence. Notice the change in interaction. People stop assuming your availability. They stop demanding immediate answers. They stop overfamiliar behavior. Not because you corrected them, but because they no longer feel entitled. Entitlement requires repetition. Isolation breaks repetition. This is where hierarchy begins to invert. Previously, you adapted to the group's rhythm. Now, the group adapts to the uncertainty you introduce. Uncertainty is discomfort forces caution. Caution alters tone. People become more precise, more restrained, more deliberate. They choose words carefully. They avoid unnecessary pressure. They hesitate before crossing boundaries, not out of fear, but because they no longer know the cost of crossing. Unknown cost always slows behavior. Isolation also changes how authority is perceived. Authority is not volume, it is finality. When you speak less, each word carries more weight. When you act less frequently, each action signals intent. When you appear rarely, presence gains gravity. This is not mystique. This is scarcity. A ruler who appears everywhere loses distinction. Distinction requires distance. Distance creates elevation. At T stage, people begin referencing you differently, not emotionally, structurally. He decides quietly. He keeps his own counsel. He doesn't involve himself unnecessarily. These statements signal a shift. You are no longer part of the emotional economy. You are a part of the decision layer. Some will resent this change. They feel disoriented. They feel downgraded. They feel excluded. This resentment is evidence of hierarchy realignment. Loss of access feels like loss of status. The critical mistake at this stage is reassurance. Reassurance attempts to restore comfort. Comfort restores old patterns. Old patterns restore old hierarchy. You do not reassure. You remain consistent. Consistency stabilizes your new position. Over time, isolation changes how conflict behaves around you. People argue less in your presence. They avoid involving you in emotional disputes. They resolve issues before bringing them to you. Why? Because emotional volatility and isolation do not mix. They sense that emotional pressure will not move you. This removes incentive to use it. By now, hierarchy has shifted without a single confrontation. You did not assert dominance. You did not demand respect. You did not explain boundaries. You simply removed availability. And availability is the invisible ladder everyone climbs. Power is not seized. Power is repositioned. Isolation is the act of stepping off the lower rung and letting others adjust to the gap. By the time isolation has been in place long enough, something subtle happens. The outside world stops being the main pressure. The pressure turns inward. This is where isolation stops looking oppressive and starts becoming difficult, because now there is no one left to blame. No distractions to hide behind. No conversations to soften discomfort. No noise to drown out hesitation. Only your patterns. Social life. Masks. Weakness. By spreading it out, indecision becomes discussion. Fear becomes humor. Doubt becomes shared uncertainty. Alone, these tricks stop working. Every hesitation is yours. Every impulse is visible. Every excuse collapses under silence. This is why most people break here. Not because isolation harms them, but because it reveals them. Isolation removes emotional outsourcing. There is no one to reassure you. No one to normalize bad habits. No one to absorb your anxiety. At first, this feels Your mind looks for stimulation. Your body looks for interruption. Your attention drifts toward anything that creates reaction. This is withdrawal. Not from people. From dependency. If you endure this phase, your nervous system begins to recalibrate. You stop reacting to silence as a threat. You stop interpreting stillness as emptiness. You stop needing constant confirmation that you exist. Your baseline lowers, and when your baseline lowers, clarity rises. This is where real independence forms. Not independence from others. Independence from emotional triggers. You no longer rush to explain yourself. You no longer defend reflexively. You no longer seek agreement before acting. Not because you are confident. Because you are self-contained. People are dangerous in subtle ways. They cannot be hurried. They cannot be emotionally cornered. Pressure needs reaction to work. Isolation removes reaction. This internal shift changes how you experience decisions. Before, decisions were negotiated internally. What will this cause? How will this be received? Will this disrupt things? Now decisions move differently. You assess costs. You assess timing. You act. No internal debate. No emotional bargaining. This is not coldness. This is efficiency. Rulers who depend on affection lose authority. Affection demands maintenance. Maintenance demands compromise. Isolation ends the need for maintenance. Your actions stop being performances. They become statements. There's also loss here. Isolation strips identities that were never yours. The version of you that existed to be liked. The version that existed to be useful. The version that existed to be included. Letting these go can feel like erasure. It is not. It is compression. As compression happens, something unsettling appears. You become less impressed by things that once excited you, less interested in conversations that once felt important, less tolerant of emotional noise. This is not arrogance. This is filtration. Your attention becomes selective. And attention is power. People around you will feel this shift without understanding it. They will say you're intense. You're hard to read. You don't react anymore. They are sensing coherence. Fragmented people leak energy. Coherent people hold it. Isolation also changes your relationship with time. Time no longer feels scarce. It feels deep. Hours are not interrupted. Thoughts complete themselves. Plans stretch beyond immediate gratification. Long-term thinking becomes natural, and long-term thinkers are incompatible with short-term systems. This is the danger point. You realize you could re-enter social life differently now. With restraint, with silence, with leverage. But temptation appears here. If you return without discipline, you dissolve everything you built. Isolation must remain structural, not emotional. A position, not a mood. You are no longer shaped by proximity. You are shaped by internal order. Once that order forms, it does not disappear. And anyone who interacts with you is now interacting with something solid. At some point, isolation reaches a limit, not because it stops working, but because power that never touches the world remains theoretical. Isolation builds structure, but structure must eventually interact. The danger is not re-entry itself. The danger is reverting. Most people return emotionally before they return strategically. That mistake erases everything. Re-entry begins with a rule: most people fail immediately. You do not return as the same version of yourself. You do not bring explanations. You do not bring stories. You do not bring vulnerability as proof of sincerity. You bring presence, not intimacy. Presence without intimacy is destabilizing. The first adjustment is behavioral. You no longer match energy. When people are animated, you stay measured. When people rush, you slow down. When people overshare, you listen without reciprocating. Mirroring is how bonds form. Breaking mirroring is how hierarchy forms. This is subtle but immediate. People feel the imbalance, even if they cannot name it. The second adjustment is conversational. You stop filling silence. Silence is no longer a gap to be repaired. It is a condition you allow. Most people rush to speak because silence exposes them. When you are comfortable inside it, others begin talking around you instead of to you. This shifts the center of gravity. Next comes commitment restraint. You do not commit early. You do not agree reflexively. You do not close decisions socially. You say, I'll see. Possibly. Let's check later. This keeps timelines fluid. Fixed timelines create expectation. Expectation creates obligation. Obligation is how power leaks back out. You also change how you exit. You leave before energy peaks. You leave without explanation. You leave without emotional residue. No dramatic goodbye. No justification. Early exits preserve possession. Late exits invite intimacy. People will respond to this with tests. They will escalate friendliness. They will escalate provocation. They will escalate emotional appeal. This is not aggression. It is boundary probing. They are trying to discover whether the old version of you still exists. If you react emotionally, the test succeeds. If you explain yourself, the test succeeds. If you remain consistent, the test ends. Consistency exhausts probing. Another critical rule: you never clarify ambiguity unless it benefits you. If people misunderstand your distance, you do not rush to correct it. Misunderstanding creates space. Space creates caution. Caution is useful. Clarity benefits others more than it benefits you. Your speech pattern also changes. You stop narrating your reasoning. You stop offering context. You stop turning statements into conversations. You say what is necessary. You stop there. People fill the rest with their own projections. Projection is influence you don't have to manage. Rulers lose authority not through cruelty but through overexposure. Exposure invites familiarity. Familiarity invites entitlement. Entitlement invites challenge. Distance prevents all three. As you move this way, something predictable happens. Some people fade. Not angrily. Not dramatically. They simply lose interest. This is not loss. This is filtration. Those who require access to feel relevant cannot operate at distance. Otros, adaptación. They become more formal, more precise, more recaucious. They stop assuming emotional credit. This is not respect in the moral sense. It is recognition of boundaries. Your greatest advantage at this stage is reversibility. You can leave again at any moment. No explanations owed. No bridges burned. No emotional debt accumulated. Exit remains intact. Exit is power. Over time, interaction stops draining you because you are no longer absorbing others. You are not regulating moods. You are not cushioning reactions. You are not smoothing discomfort. You are present, not entangled. Isolation is no longer something you do. It is something you carry. Even among people, you remain internally separate, not distant, not hostile, unattached. At this stage, something irreversible has happened. You are no longer practicing isolation. You are no longer working on distance. You are no longer deciding when to pull back. The pull itself is gone. What remains is a fixed internal position that does not shift when people enter or exit your life. This is not discipline anymore. This is orientation. Most people live inside social gravity without noticing it. They feel pulled toward agreement, pulled toward response, pulled toward participation. When silence appears, they rush to fill it. When tension appears, they rush to smooth it. When distance appears, they rush to close it. They call this being human. It is not. It is being governed. Living outside social gravity means you no longer experience these pulls as commands. You feel them, but they do not move you. A mensaje arrives. You don't feel urgency. A reaction forms. You don't feel compelled to resolve it. A misunderstanding appears. You don't feel obligated to correct it. This is not indifference. This is non-reactivity. And non-reactivity terrifies systems built on emotional exchange. At this level, people no longer know how to categorize you. You are not hostile. You are not warm. You are not distant in a dramatic way. You are simply not hooked, because every social system relies on hooks. Approval, fear, belonging, recognition. Once those hooks dissolve, leverage disappears. Something subtle begins happening around you. People slow down. Not consciously, not deliberately. They measure themselves more. They choose words more carefully. They hesitate before assuming access. Not because you demand it, but because they cannot predict the cost of crossing boundaries that are never explained. Uncertainty forces caution. Caution rewrites hierarchy. At this stage, you stop feeling the need to manage people. You don't correct them. You don't train them. You don't enforce rules. Your consistency does the work. People either adapt or they drift out of relevance. Both outcomes serve you. The most secure form of power is not fear or love. It is independence from both. Love demands maintenance. Fear demands reinforcement. Independence demands nothing. That is why it lasts. Living outside social gravity also requires accepting a cost that never goes away. You will not feel fully embedded again. Groups will feel temporary. Shared emotions will feel shallow. Collective excitement will feel distant. This is not arrogance. This is structural separation. Your nervous system is no longer tuned to group validation. Many mistake this for emptiness. It is not emptiness. It is silence without anxiety, and silence without anxiety is rare. You also become harder to manipulate than you expect, not because you are alert, but because manipulation needs emotional momentum. Guilt requires responsiveness. Shame requires self-doubt. Pressure requires urgency. You no longer supply these conditions. Attempts collapse mid. You'll notice people describe you vaguely now. They won't say you're powerful. They won't say you're intimidating. They'll say he's hard to read. He's different. He keeps his distance. Language breaks down when familiar patterns fail. There is no performance here. You don't cultivate mystery. You don't signal dominance. You don't posture strength. Posture is compensation. You no longer compensate. At T's point, your decisions no longer feel heavy. They feel clean. You don't overthink consequences socially. You don't rehearse explanations. You don't seek agreement. You assess. You act. You move on. This is not recklessness. This is sovereignty. Power here is quiet and deeply unsettling to others, because it doesn't announce itself, because it doesn't negotiate, because it doesn't ask permission to exist. You're not trying to control anyone. You are simply no longer controllable. This is why being alone is dangerous, not because it separates you from people, but because it separates you from influence. And influence is where most people lose themselves. Without noticing, there's no dramatic ending to this path. No applause, no validation, no audience. Just stillness. And from stillness, every decisive move becomes possible.